Hello everyone, Prime here, and today we're going to be talking about a certain little interesting thing that will actually be relevant come the release of the Voodoo Pantheon. And that's, where exactly does this new pantheon and its gods, or spirits, the lower, fit in with the current story of Smite? Believe it or not, Smite actually does have a story that was relevant to the game upon release. And this story dictates the exact reason as to why the Order and Chaos sides clash every game, why there are two sides every match, and there's no free-for-all mode. You see, the gods of each pantheon came together at some point to create the mortal world, the other planets, and everything within the universe. The people were loved by the gods, and the wise gods adored their people, as there was a good relationship between them. The people would worship the gods and bestow upon them power through doing this. In return, the gods would allow the people to prosper and live happy lives. This was something of a golden age in the timeline. And whilst this was a prosperous time, eventually things got too good. People began to travel the earth and explore new wondrous lands, but this new knowledge and insight came at a cost. The people saw new lands, yes, but they also learned of new mythologies, new gods that would reside over similar things to the gods that they were currently worshipping. How could this be? How could it be that there is not one supreme Lord of Death? Have I been worshipping an inferior god of death? Such confusion as this, terror spread throughout the world, and eventually chaos amongst the gods was also spread as the flow of worshippers began to shift and gods felt slighted. There were wars in the holy planes of existence. Asgard, Mount Olympus, these places became battlegrounds for a time. But eventually, the fight came to the earth, and it had cataclysmic consequences. People suffered earthquakes, floods, volcanic eruptions, until the people could stand this no longer. Something had to be done, and at first, worship of the gods was accelerated in an attempt to quell their mighty anger. But in truth, all this really did was just empower the gods further. They had more power through increased worship, and they waged more drastic, violent conflict. But some mortals were not fooled by this need to overly worship the gods, and realized that the worship was the source of their power. They refused to worship the gods, and in fact denied it, burning temples, killing devout followers of the gods, and worshippers diminished. Their numbers dwindling, the gods grew angry. They would not accept this lack of worship, this lack of power, and an alliance was formed. The leading deities of each pantheon, or significant deities within them, came together and formed the Old Order. This order was no longer considered for the well-being and happiness of humanity. All people would be punished for this betrayal, be they devout followers, worshippers, or betrayers. But some gods disagreed with this. Thor, Neith, Athena had their different reasons. Athena, the wise goddess, knew that this was not a good idea. Neith foresaw that the fates of the gods would not look bright should this transpire, and Thor representing the moral issue as well, knowing that this just was not right. They rebelled against the gods, and a new faction was made as well, the Elysian Uprising, who challenged the Old Order. But not every deity decided to join one side or another. They would be constantly tempting the balance for their own personal reasons. Some were spawned as demigods into the world, such as Athena, a daughter of the sea god Nereus, who was made obsolete by Poseidon in the original mythology, and that's probably the case in Smite's story, though I'm not 100% sure about that. Either way, NASA is recruited into the Elysian Uprising. Yes, she's still not in Smite. She was launched in one of the early comics talking about this story, and still nothing. What? Why? Anyway, not every god fully committed to this conflict either. The Chinese pantheon is full of deities who are out for their own motives, unlike the previous Norse, Greek, and Egyptian pantheons who are more united in their goals, with the exception, of course, Hades, Anubis, and Loki, who are outliers of those mythologies. The Chinese mythology is very split. You've got characters such as, I'm sure Erlang Shen, but definitely Guan Yu, who serve the Jade Emperor, and the Jade Emperor is very much reserved from this conflict of the gods. He seems to maintain his power very well, or well enough so that there's not too much turmoil with the people, his worshippers. However, Wukong also seems to maintain his power as well, as does Hebo, as does Sun Wukong. Though Sun Wukong might be something of an outlier. See, one loophole I find with the story is that if the gods needed worshippers to fuel their strength, surely they wouldn't have been powerful enough to create the universe, even if they did come together. If the sole strength of their power is the worshippers who fuel them. In Sun Wukong's mythology, his strength is pretty much his own. He earns his greatest feats through improving himself. Maybe there's a choice that the gods did when they created men. They took away the divinity of their power, or their ultimate right to their power, when they created man and gave some of that to them. Maybe this is part of the reason why men were created in the image of gods. That's just a bit of my speculation about the story, though. That's not confirmed. I had to tell myself that to make sure that I don't concern myself with some of the annoying issues I have with the story. But moving on, as I said, a lot of the different Chinese gods have their own motives. Wukong aids Loki and Hel in taking down Zeus and essentially starting the destruction of the world. Whether Wukong was cued into this or he was motivated by another reason, it's not too explained all that well. But either way, he does help them. Sun Wukong, again. Sun Wukong, possibly Nuwa, might not necessarily be affiliated with the Jade Emperor, maybe acting on their own, or at least might not necessarily be ultimately loyal to him or bound to him as far as duty is concerned, which is implied at some point during Smite's story. This is quite interesting for other pantheons that haven't necessarily been released yet. As far as Hindu mythology, that's a very reserved mythology as well. We can say the same about Japanese mythology in that it hasn't seemed to truly join this conflict yet. So where does this leave voodooism and that's mythology, its pantheon? Well, that pantheon has not only just yet to be released, but it probably also means that like these other pantheons that have kept to themselves, the voodoo deities, the lower spirits, have probably also kept to themselves, keeping their people either depressed through a lack of worship or prosperous through the two-way system that's been established here. Though with the lower, I think it might work a little differently. See, unlike a lot of the other pantheons, excluding Hinduism, the lower have a more direct way of communicating with the people. They can possess them. They can speak for the people sometimes. And thanks to this, communication might be able to be established depending on where Smite and Hi-Rez choose to go with the story. It could set a special precedent in the case of voodooism, because part of the reason for this conflict was a lack of communication between the divine beings and the mortals. With this lack of communication solved, perhaps the voodoo people and the lower might in fact join arms more easily to try and either resolve this issue or protect themselves from the destruction of the earth, the universe, and everything in it. But we'll just have to wait and see on that front. Now, I have already talked about the story of Smite once before, and this video was partially motivated by lore and mythology YouTubers for other MOBAs. You see, those YouTubers have actually talked about the stories of those games, and whilst those games do seem to have a lot more direct mythology with them, Smite still does have direct mythology here and there. I've just not really covered it that well. I've only covered it in one video, really, properly. That video I called Why Do We Fight? If you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch it. Made me want to play the game a bit more whilst it did, and to be honest, of the different other MOBA game lore YouTubers that I watched, those kind of made me want to play Dota again, for instance. Which I'm probably actually going to do. Not that I'm going to turn into a Dota channel, don't worry, I'll still stay with Smite. But my point is, I feel like part of my job as a lore YouTuber should be to make you want to play Smite. And whilst I feel like I've done that to a degree, I've not really covered Smite's lore all that well. I've covered the backstory of the different gods. Yes, most of the gods' backstories are linked to their original in-world, our world, lore. But not every single god has the same exact lore that they do in our world that they do in Smite. Not every pantheon is the same as this as well. Most are though. So we are going to try and do that more on the channel. But if you enjoyed this video, found it insightful or useful in any way, go ahead and leave a like. A big like please, as editing this video and getting it out for Wednesdays, I'm assuming I do post it on Wednesday, today, is a bit of a challenge because 3 uploads in a row, very difficult for me recently, so a like would mean a lot. And thank the gods I didn't actually say it in some cringy way, like make sure to smash that like button, or god I hate it when YouTubers say that. Anyways, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content just like this, and until the next video, have a very good day. I have been Prime, and have yourselves a great rest of the day. Bye bye.